The cold and aloof female CEO touched her body lotion in front of me, her gaze icy while her mind was plotting how to win me over. Oh dear, did hubby see me? If you don't take the initiative, I'll put my clothes back on, I mean it. She slowly put on her clothes, sat in front of the computer, and searched how to make hubby take the initiative. I was dumbfounded. Ever since I acquired mind-reading abilities, I started doubting if this was really the same cold and icy female CEO. Chapter 1. On the surface, she appeared to be a cold and aloof lady, but deep down, she was quite fanciful. I stood not far from Susan, watching her furrow her brows while staring at the computer screen. People who didn't know her would think she was dealing with some serious work matters. Who would have thought that a cold and frosty female CEO would resort to seeking advice from online users because her newlywed husband wasn't being affectionate enough? This was outrageous. Beyond imagination. I couldn't help but sigh, tentatively calling out to her, "Susan Smith? Oh dear, why did hubby call me by my full name? We're already married. Why does he still feel so distant?" Her thoughts were faster than her words. Following that, Susan turned her head to look at me, her expression cold and indifferent. "What's the matter, me?" To be honest, I wasn't accustomed to this contrast. Shall we go to sleep? I pointed at the bed, cautiously asking her. After all, today was our wedding night. No matter how fanciful she acted, we still had to go through the motions. Husband wants to sleep with me. Is he also falling for me? So, wearing silk pajamas and applying body lotion actually worked. Tomorrow, I must remember to give a chicken leg to my assistant. Susan nodded gracefully and with minimal words, she made a nasal sound. Me. As I looked at her indifferent face, I kept imagining her inner cries of excitement. On one hand, there was the emotionless arranged marriage, and on the other hand, there was the silly and adorable wife's everyday romance. It all felt a bit disjointed. Sighing, I climbed onto the bed and prepared to sleep. Oh dear, husband wants to sleep with me, how happy. I've waited for him for over 10 years, and I finally married him. Ha ha ha. Upon hearing this thought, I abruptly opened my eyes, staring incredulously at Susan, who was about to lie down on the bed. I stared at her so intensely that her complexion seemed a bit off. "Why are you staring at me if you're not going to sleep?" Her brows furrowed slightly, and her face appeared somewhat puzzled. If it weren't for her inner voice being so loud that it gave me a headache, I would have actually thought she disliked me. I used to believe that she detested arranged marriages. But now, it seems different from what I imagined. Chapter 2, as they say, marriage is a significant matter, arranged by parents and matchmakers. And that's exactly how it was for Susan and me. My father and her father were comrades in arms when they were young. It is said that Susan's father almost died on the battlefield to save my father. With no way to repay that life-saving favor, the only option left was to use his daughter. So, half a month ago, I had a flash marriage with the female CEO, Susan. In my heart, I always felt that she was somewhat unwilling, but Susan perfectly met my criteria for a spouse. Especially with that beautiful face that resembled a fairy, she would turn heads when walking on the street. Before our marriage, my father was afraid I wouldn't agree, so he tried to persuade me. When you were young, you used to play with mud together every day. One time, when you were playing house, Xiaoxu called you husband in front of all the adults, and you shyly buried your head in the sofa. I suddenly remembered back in elementary school when I didn't do well on a midterm exam and was afraid of getting punished at home. I squatted on the side of the road, hungry and afraid to go back. At that time, she was wearing a white dress, so elegant, just like a princess from a fairy tale. She gave me a lollipop, held my hand, and talked to me a lot. The events of that day have always been engraved in my heart. But every time I saw Susan after that, I always felt she was too cold and not as easy to get along with as she was when we were young. It wasn't until high school when her family moved near mine. In her senior year of high school, I happened to be taking the entrance exam for university. In high school, I learned that she was not only the school beauty for 3 years but also a top student. She was like a legendary existence. Perhaps I was influenced by Susan. I worked hard during my 3 years of high school and got into the same university as her. But just as I started my freshman year, she was preparing to study abroad. Before going abroad, she even witnessed our class monitor confessing to me. That day, she deliberately pulled me aside and talked to me seriously, analyzing the 300 reasons why being in a relationship affects studying. However, looking back now, I always feel that something wasn't quite right. Susan's voice brought me back from my drifting thoughts. Why is my husband looking at me like this? Could he be thinking of doing something? Oh my, why do I feel a little excited? So nervous. Me. Subconsciously, my mind started to think, could it be that my wife is actually thinking of something? Does she want me to do something? Oh my, suddenly I feel a little restless. So excited, why does it feel like my mind is being led astray? I was at a loss for words, looking at Susan, who quietly hid her head under the blanket. I always felt like she had wanted me since I was very young. Suddenly, a mischievous thought arose in my mind, and I decided to test this playful woman. So, using one hand to support myself on the bed, I slowly leaned towards Susan. I heard her excited inner voice once again. Oh my husband is getting closer and closer. Could he want to kiss me? So shy. Should I take the initiative and get closer too? PFFT. Why does this ice-cold female CEO still have such a romantic mind? I just moved a little, and she's already conquered herself? A smile appeared on my face, a mix of exasperation and amusement, as I directly asked, do you want a kiss? Chapter 3. In an instant, I saw Susan's face freeze, and her cheeks turned red. There was astonishment in her eyes, as if I had guessed her thoughts. Seeing her lack of response and even her inner voice disappearing, I hesitated. Could it be that she's all talk and no action? After a moment, I was about to turn my head, feeling guilty, but she suddenly grabbed my arm, and a blush quickly spread across her cheeks. Seeing this, a hint of confusion rose in my heart. If you don't agree when I ask, but don't let me leave either, what are you thinking? The temperature between our eyes gradually rose, and the rosy color on her face extended to her ears. A soft, mosquito-like voice sounded. Suddenly, it felt somewhat unreal. Did she just make a sound? Seemingly seeing my lack of reaction, Susan, still blushing, spoke a little louder. I do. She lifted her gaze, and her watery eyes started to stare straight at me. It made me feel a bit flustered. Oh, I was just talking big, and now Susan actually wants to take it seriously? Suddenly, I felt like I was back in my childhood, being called husband by Susan in front of our parents, and my mind was a mess, not knowing how to handle it. Under Susan's watery gaze, I couldn't help but nervously swallow. The next moment, Susan's confused inner voice came again. Why hasn't my husband made a move yet? I even spoke so loudly just now. Hurry up and take action, husband. I can't wait. Don't be fooled by someone's calm appearance. Their inner passion may be burning like fire. And don't be deceived by someone's teasing words. Their inner self may be a bundle of nerves. Seeing Susan's expression starting to turn disdainful, I made a decision. I reached out and covered Susan's eyes, lightly brushing my lips against hers. Susan's body began to stiffen. I grinned, suddenly feeling a bit mischievous. I turned my head, flipped over, and covered myself with the blanket to go to sleep. Ha ha ha, dare to look down on your husband. Lying on the side, I was savoring the feeling of victory. Behind me, I faintly heard Susan's lament. Why did my husband only give me a quick kiss? Don't people usually say 3 hours? Is it because I'm not proactive enough, or am I not fragrant enough today? PFFT. I couldn't help but almost burst out laughing, burying my head in the blanket, giggling. How can the Ice Queen CEO be this adorable? Perhaps it's because she was tired from the wedding during the day, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I didn't want to open them again. Just as I was dozing off, I heard Susan's voice again. Is my husband asleep? Oops, he didn't hold me while sleeping. Should I secretly move into his embrace? Hopefully, he won't notice. The Ice Queen CEO is such a drama queen. I rolled my eyes, feeling annoyed, and let sleepiness wash over me. I had no intention of making any more moves. In my drowsy state, I suddenly felt something soft in my embrace. Chapter 4. I woke up early the next morning. The first thing I saw was a delicate and pretty face. We were so close that if I lifted my head slightly, I could touch Susan's lips. Her long eyelashes curled up slightly, and her petite nose moved with each breath. Her face was blushing like an apple. My wife looks so beautiful. Should I sneak a kiss? Just as I was about to sneak up and do it, Susan's eyelashes suddenly fluttered. He. My husband didn't push me away last night. It's so comfortable in my husband's embrace. I have to be quiet and not let my husband know that I'm awake. Is this silly girl still pretending with me? My face darkened, and I directly pulled my arm out of Susan's embrace, leaving her wide-eyed and confused. Then her gaze gradually started to look like someone who had just woken up. Ha ha ha, I can't stop laughing. She's been caught red-handed and still pretends she just woke up. I held back my smile and Susan began to regain her cold CEO demeanor. She glanced at me indifferently, then turned her head and got out of bed to go to the bathroom. The contrast with last night's appearance is just too big. A smirk appeared on my face. Who was the one last night asking for kisses and hugs? Not even 3 seconds later, I heard Susan's pitiful inner voice again. Why isn't my husband holding me anymore? Is it because I don't look pretty when I just woke up? Did my husband start to dislike me? There seems to be some eye boogers. But it's not something I can control, right? Ha ha ha, I feel like I'm going to burst from holding in my laughter. I collapsed on the bed, unable to stop giggling. When Susan came out, there was no trace of anything unusual on my face. As she walked into the bathroom, I had a thought and blurted out, "Excuse me." Susan's expression suddenly became bewildered, then she started to panic, followed by confusion, and finally, she looked quite displeased. The changes were like a revolving lantern, quite entertaining. Ha ha ha, I laughed inwardly. Let her act all cold and distant in front of her own husband. Before I even turned on the tap, I heard Susan's inner voice again. Why is my husband still acting so distant with me? Does he not love me anymore? Why is my husband not sleeping together with stinky old me at night? My face froze. Seems like I played too much. After breakfast, we both went to our respective companies. As I put on my shoes, I glanced at Susan standing next to me, and then I heard her inner turmoil. I really want to spend a little more time with my husband. How should I ask him to take him to work? My husband is almost done putting on his shoes. I need to come up with a better excuse before that. I deliberately slowed down my actions, wanting to see how long Susan could hold on. But this person is really stubborn. She watched me tie my shoelaces for 5 minutes, her inner anxiety growing for 5 minutes, and yet she didn't say a word. All right, I won't hope for anything anymore. Let's go. I picked up my bag and turned to leave. Susan still followed behind me, continuing her endless inner chatter. If there ever comes a day when she can hold on, I actually want to give Susan an award. The king of mouthiness, queen of drama. After arriving at the company, my supervisor immediately assigned me to manage a new project. While I said it was a great responsibility, in my opinion, it was clear that nobody else wanted to handle this tricky situation, so it fell on my shoulders. I didn't have high hopes until I saw the name of the other company on the documents. Oh well, what a coincidence. Isn't this Susan's company? To be precise, it's also my company, considering it's our shared property as a married couple. In the face of my colleague's consolation, I put on a troubled expression. I will definitely not disappoint the company's trust in me, but I can only do my best and give it a try. While I appeared conflicted, inside, I was already overjoyed. After organizing the documents, I took a taxi directly to Susan's company. When I stood at the front desk, I happened to overhear their gossip about Susan. What do you think? What kind of man does President Shen like? I'm really curious. Her ideal type must be a charming muscular guy, right? A charming muscular guy? I glanced down at my casual attire and fell into contemplation. Why do you care about what type of man she likes? She won't be interested in any of us. Well, you never know. Have you not seen those romantic love stories and dramas where the boss falls in love with an ordinary employee? Maybe something like that could happen to us. It's a beautiful thought, but reality is cruel. Susan is already married, and she happens to be my wife. I waited in the lobby for about 15 minutes, with 14 of those minutes spent listening to their various discussions about Susan. It seems like I should be more cautious and guard against my rivals. Lost in thought, Susan's assistant came down. Assistant Chen led me to the guest area. Just as I was about to enter the room, I saw Susan coming out of the other end of the conference room. She seemed to have just finished a meeting. Just when I thought Susan would walk past me without acknowledgement, she actually walked straight towards me. Do you need something? Before I could even comment on her cold expression, I heard her inner voice cheer loudly. Oh my, is my husband here specifically to see me? I'm so touched. Indeed, my husband is the best to me in the whole world. Me. This aloof female CEO is actually a romantic at heart. I cleared my throat and faced Susan's expressionless face, suppressing my laughter. I'm here on behalf of our company, or rather, for that previous project. In the next moment, I heard her joy plummet from the clouds. My husband didn't come to see me because of work, right? Yeah, otherwise, it would have been fine for someone else to come. Indeed, having a romantic mind is not scary, but the self-strategies of a romantic mind are the most terrifying. Chapter 6. Afterwards, It seemed like Susan had other matters to attend to and left at the urging of her assistant. Soon, I met the person in charge of the project coordination and resumed negotiations between our respective companies. For some reason, today's negotiations went incredibly smoothly. I didn't feel any of the difficulties that my colleagues had mentioned. But I didn't think too much about it. I just wanted to get this project done quickly. As the conversation came to an end and both sides were joking around, I suddenly heard a familiar voice in my mind. Why is my husband laughing so happily? Let me see who he's with. This unexpected voice startled me, causing my whole body to tremble. Did I hear correctly? Is this what they call hearing someone's voice before seeing them? The next second, the door to the meeting room was knocked open. CEO, the project manager beside me instantly lost their smile and stood up, looking towards Susan. I wondered, is Susan really that terrifying? I turned my head and met that cold and delicate face. Well, when she's not smiling, she does look quite intimidating. But it's just a facade. Inside, she's just a little troublemaker. Continue your discussion. Just pretend I'm not here. After saying that, Susan sat right next to us. I didn't mind, but the project manager didn't dare to say anything. Her visible nervousness was evident. Carrying me on his back while laughing, and now he can't even say a word? Hank, really, just focus on work and stop joking around with other women. Susan's inner thoughts were quite entertaining. I felt a tingling sensation on my scalp as I listened. The meeting room fell into silence. I watched as the project manager wiped the sweat off their forehead and tried to maintain a smile. Now that the project matters have been discussed, I won't take up any more of your time. I took the lead in breaking the deadlock, holding the documents and preparing to leave. The project manager stood up as well. Well, since we've finished with the project, why don't we have a pleasant dinner together? I happen to have free time tonight, Mr. Lin. I saw her falter after saying that, instinctively looking towards Susan. I believe it was just a slip of the tongue. But Susan remained unfazed, and her inner thoughts reached me once again. Dinner? What kind of dinner? You've only known each other for such a short time and you want to treat him? This woman, doesn't she have a husband of her own? Why does she have her eyes on my baby? I was taken aback by her sudden baby remark, nearly tripping over myself. Luckily, Susan reached out her arm and caught me. Are you okay? Her cool and soft voice rang in my ears, and I smiled. I'm fine. To avoid revealing any flaws, I quickly stood up straight and kept my distance from her. As expected, Susan started to act pitiful again. Why did my husband let go of my hand? Does he not like me anymore? I was speechless. What does one thing have to do with the other? Chapter 6. Afterwards, it seemed like Susan had other matters to attend to and left at the urging of her assistant. Soon, I met the person in charge of the project coordination and resumed negotiations between our respective companies. For some reason, today's negotiations went incredibly smoothly. I didn't feel any of the difficulties that my colleagues had mentioned. But I didn't think too much about it. I just wanted to get this project done quickly. As the conversation came to an end and both sides were joking around, I suddenly heard a familiar voice in my mind. Why is my husband laughing so happily? Let me see who he's with. This unexpected voice startled me, causing my whole body to tremble. Did I hear correctly? Is this what they call hearing someone's voice before seeing them? The next second, the door to the meeting room was knocked open. CEO, the project manager beside me instantly lost their smile and stood up, looking towards Susan. I wondered, is Susan really that terrifying? I turned my head and met that cold and delicate face. Well, when she's not smiling, she does look quite intimidating. But it's just a facade. Inside, she's just a little troublemaker. Continue your discussion. Just pretend I'm not here. After saying that, Susan sat right next to us. I didn't mind, but the project manager didn't dare to say anything. Her visible nervousness was evident. Carrying me on his back while laughing, and now he can't even say a word? Hank, really, just focus on work and stop joking around with other women. Susan's inner thoughts were quite entertaining. I felt a tingling sensation on my scalp as I listened. The meeting room fell into silence. I watched as the project manager wiped the sweat off their forehead and tried to maintain a smile. Now that the project matters have been discussed, I won't take up any more of your time. I took the lead in breaking the deadlock, holding the documents and preparing to leave. The project manager stood up as well. Well, since we've finished with the project, why don't we have a pleasant dinner together? I happen to have free time tonight, Mr. Lin. I saw her falter after saying that, instinctively looking towards Susan. I believe it was just a slip of the tongue. But Susan remained unfazed, and her inner thoughts reached me once again. Dinner? What kind of dinner? You've only known each other for such a short time and you want to treat him? This woman, doesn't she have a husband of her own? Why does she have her eyes on my baby? I was taken aback by her sudden baby remark, nearly tripping over myself. Luckily, Susan reached out her arm and caught me. Are you okay? Her cool and soft voice rang in my ears, and I smiled. I'm fine. To avoid revealing any flaws, I quickly stood up straight and kept my distance from her. As expected, Susan started to act pitiful again. Why did my husband let go of my hand? Does he not like me anymore? I was speechless. What does one thing have to do with the other? Chapter 7. After sending off the project manager, Susan and I went downstairs together. Along the way, everyone couldn't help but glance at us, their gossiping eyes so obvious. I silently sighed in my heart. Fortunately, Susan and I don't work in the same company. Otherwise, who knows what kind of rumors would be circulating about us. However, Susan seemed to be enjoying the attention. Indeed, my husband is impressive. It's such a face to be seen with him. They must think we make a perfect couple. My husband is the most handsome, the most perfect man in the world, perfectly matched with me. I have to admit, being the most handsome and perfectly matched really satisfies me. Having such a beautiful wife by my side, I feel a sense of pride. After leaving the company, I noticed that Susan didn't seem to have any intention of going back. I thought she wanted to see me off. That's fine. When the taxi arrived, I opened the door and got in, but before I could say anything, Susan followed me inside. What's going on? Could it be that she wants to accompany me back to the office? That would be too extravagant. What are you doing? I couldn't help but ask, only to receive Susan's calm response. Didn't we say we're going to have dinner? Despite her cold exterior, her heart is actually burning with passion. I raised an eyebrow, suppressing a smile. Yes, let's have dinner. Since Susan is paying, I won't hold back. Once we sat at the table, Susan handed me the menu. I glanced at the prices on the menu and my eyes almost fell out of their sockets. This restaurant looks run down from the outside, and yet each dish costs hundreds. I looked at Susan's calm expression once again. Well, then I won't be polite. When it was time to order, Susan added several signature dishes. She said to me with a cold expression, "These dishes are delicious, you should try them." But inside, she was feeling all sorts of concern. Why did my husband only order a few dishes? He's been so busy with the wedding preparations lately, it breaks my heart. His 8-pack abs have gotten smaller. My husband must eat more. My handsome husband can't go hungry. Even if she genuinely cares about me, there's no need to order more than 10 dishes. But the truth proved that Susan's taste was indeed good. This restaurant might not look impressive, but the food they serve is really delicious. I ended up eating so much that I had to lean on the wall for support as we walked. Chapter 8. After dinner, I said goodbye to Susan and went back to our respective companies. When everyone saw that I had successfully completed this project, they all asked if I had any secret techniques. I smiled and remained silent. What secret technique could there possibly be? If I were to really explain, I would probably have to start with the time when my father was saved by Susan's father on the battlefield. My supervisor was also very satisfied with my work. While treating me to a meal, they also helped me book a flight directly. It's a new business trip project, and it's even more challenging. Isn't this like jumping into the fire? I really should decline. But what can I do? I can only put on a brave face and accept the project. In the evening, while packing at home, I coincidentally ran into Susan coming back from overtime. She stood at the doorway of the room, and I could feel the tremor in her eyes at that moment. "Honey, are we going back to your father-in-law's house? What happened exactly? Does my husband not like the dishes we ordered for lunch? What did I do wrong? What should I do?" As I was placing clothes into the suitcase, I paused slightly. I glanced at Susan. She really does have an active imagination. Seeing Susan's eyes welling up with tears, as if they were about to fall any second, I couldn't bear it. So, I cleared my throat, stood up straight, and looked at her. "Well, you see, our company suddenly has a business trip project, and the timing is tight, so I came back to pack things first." To prevent Susan from overthinking, I chose to explain. Seeing this, Susan visibly relaxed. She replied softly, "Okay," but deep down, she started cheering. "Ha ha, my husband isn't going back to his father-in-law's house, he's still my husband. I'm so happy." But what kind of lousy company is this? How can they casually send people on business trips? Could there be some sleazy female boss going along? What if she calls my husband to her room in the middle of the night? This imagination is truly remarkable. I glanced at Susan, who was clearly upset and worried about herself, and sensed a hint of disappointment in her emotions. After all, she is my wife, and Susan genuinely cares about me. I approached her and tried to comfort her. Don't worry, once I handle the matters related to this project, I'll come back as soon as possible. I'll be the only one going for this project, and the person I'll be negotiating with is also a man, so there won't be any danger. I softened my tone and reached out to intertwine my pinky finger with Susan's. Susan still maintained a cold expression on her face. I didn't care about her expression at all. Did she really think I didn't know what she was thinking? Susan's thoughts. My husband took the initiative to explain to me. Is he particularly concerned about my thoughts? I'm really happy. I'm sure my husband has me in his heart. Then, Susan looked down at me and spoke with a slightly probing tone. Are you afraid that I'll be unhappy? I nodded. You're my wife, so of course I have to consider your feelings. Although I know you're worried about something happening to me during a business trip alone, rest assured, I'm already an adult and I can take care of myself. I added, seeing Susan's face clearly transitioning from disappointment to brightness. If anything happens, remember to let me know. When I said this, she still wore a cold expression on her face, but deep down, she was already overjoyed. Such a little brat. Did she really think I didn't know anything? I've already got her completely figured out. Seeing how easily I agreed, Susan even started to push her luck. Call me every day to let me know you're safe. I nodded. All right. Perhaps this is Susan's true intention? After all, she's the kind of person who starts crying if she hasn't seen her husband for 10 minutes. Seeing me simply agreeing without saying anything else, Susan glanced at me sneakily. But her stolen glance was caught by me. I couldn't help but smile. I'm already her husband, so what can't be openly looked at? I shifted my gaze and decided to speak up. You can also call me this cold and aloof wife of mine. I have to give her some leeway. Sure enough, Susan's expression became even more radiant. Chapter 9. The next morning, Susan personally drove me to the airport. On the way, she kept a calm demeanor while driving, but her mind was filled with constant chatter. My husband is going alone to another city. Will it be safe? Should I go with him? But would he think I'm being too clingy? I silently commented. It won't be that bad. Sigh. I'm about to be separated from my husband. A day without seeing him feels like an eternity. What should I do? I already miss him. I also felt a bit anxious. Then come with me. Don't just daydream inside your mind, take some action. However, even when we got out of the car, Susan maintained her cold and aloof demeanor. Internally, I thought, you're noble, you're amazing, it serves you right to lose your husband for a few days. Feeling a bit frustrated, I turned to leave with my luggage, but Susan called me back. In that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. But the little brat just reminded me, stay safe. The tone of her words, the expression on her face, it was like a homeroom teacher. Even my dad doesn't speak so seriously and sternly. Fine. Who asked me to choose her as my wife? However, on the first night staying at the hotel, I still called Susan to let her know I was safe. On the other end of the phone, she took the initiative to say a few more things. How's the hotel environment? Is the project going smoothly? If there's anything difficult to solve, you can tell me. I chuckled softly. Are you worried about me? She was acting so calm and composed at the airport, but couldn't resist after just a few hours. Susan honestly responded, Perhaps because of the distance between us, I couldn't hear Susan's thoughts right now, and I didn't know what she was thinking at the moment. But that's okay. After spending this time together, I've already figured out Susan's personality. We chatted a bit more about random things, and before hanging up, I reminded her to eat on time and that I would be back soon. Susan obediently agreed. We stayed silent for a moment, and she didn't hang up the phone. So, we just listened to each other's shallow breaths. Just then, someone knocked on my door, and I heard the voice of a female colleague outside. Hank, want to grab a meal together? Coming. I responded and said a few more words to Susan before ending the call. Without overthinking, I put on my coat and walked out. Originally, this business trip was supposed to be just me, but the supervisor was worried that I couldn't handle it alone, so they assigned a female colleague to accompany me. It happened suddenly, and they didn't tell me in advance. Until we reached the ticket check at the airport, The two of us finally bumped into each other. I didn't think much of this small matter, so there was no need to explain it to Susan. But after returning to the hotel in the evening, Susan's call came on time. The woman on the other end of the phone took a long time to speak. "What were you doing just now?" "Me, having dinner." "Alone?" "Me. No, I was with a colleague." "Didn't you say that you were the only one going on a business trip?" With each question and answer, I understood. Perhaps Susan really wanted to ask about the female colleague, right? Her roundabout technique was so clumsy. I decided to directly address her inner doubts. "She was also sent here temporarily. She's my subordinate." "Oh, by the way, she's already married." Facing the cold and aloof CEO wife, I honestly disclosed every detail. Susan paused slightly on the phone, just asking. Although her voice was calm, I found it amusing. I teased her on purpose. "Oh, I thought you were jealous." I could clearly hear the woman's breath on the other end of the phone becoming unsteady. Susan didn't say anything more. Whether she was angered or completely speechless, I couldn't tell. I glanced at the time, and although it was still early, it wasn't going to work if I continued to be at odds with Susan like this. I tentatively asked, "If there's nothing else, should I hang up?" Me? Is everything all right?" She agreed so readily. "It seems there's no rush." Chapter 10. In the blink of an eye, I was away on a business trip for 3 days. Before leaving, I had told Susan that I would be gone for 3 days, so when I called her in the morning, she probably thought I was about to return. She even pretended to be serious and asked if she should come to the airport to pick me up. It's not like I was intentionally playing with her. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in the hotel, casually saying, "The original 3-day itinerary has been extended to 5 days, depending on the situation." "Understood." She didn't even utter a single unnecessary word. But who am I? Just from Susan's tone, I could tell that someone was genuinely angry. I playfully teased her. "Wife, we haven't seen each other for 3 days already, and I really miss you." The other end of the phone was silent, with only the sound of Susan's slightly erratic breathing. "Well, it's not early now. You should go to bed early too." "Hang up." I placed my phone on the bedside cabinet and jumped onto the bed, laughing loudly while hugging the blanket. I could imagine the expression on Susan's face right now. The next morning, I was awakened by a knock on the door. I thought it was my female colleague calling me to have breakfast together, so I put on my jacket and walked over to open the door. But when I opened the door, I saw Susan standing outside. She was wearing a white dress, looking ethereal and beautiful. I was stunned. Did she have teleportation powers? Susan's watery eyes stared at my face intently as she took a step forward. "What did you mean by what you said last night?" I looked up, a bit slow to react because I had just woken up. "Huh? What did I say?" I could clearly hear Susan's thoughts. "Husband, you said you missed me, right? You couldn't have forgotten, could you?" "Doesn't matter, anyway I'm already here. He definitely can't just chase me away, right?" I wanted to laugh. Was this the cold and aloof Susan that others saw? I walked up to her, reaching out to hug her. "Do you miss me?" Susan didn't say a word, but her thoughts were filled with excitement. "Yes. I miss you so much, husband." Her voice was so loud it hurt my ears. I lightly bit my lip, pretending not to hear her thoughts. "Don't you miss me? Then I won't miss you either." After saying that, I pulled my arm out of her grasp and turned around, intending to go back to the room. Suddenly, Susan reached out and grabbed my arm. She nodded. "I miss you." I bent down and kissed her on the lips. "Rewarding you." "Humph, can't even resist you?" Susan's heart was bursting with joy. "Yay, my husband kissed me. It was worth rushing here overnight." Chapter 11. However, I wasn't completely immersed in the lovey-dovey moments with Susan. I changed my clothes and asked her to wait for me in the room while I went out to discuss work. The project was already almost finalized, and today we would sign the contract, so everything would be in order. To celebrate, the collaborating party invited us to have a meal. After all, it was the client's father who took the initiative to invite us, so my female colleague and I couldn't refuse. But once we sat down at the table, it was inevitable to have a few drinks. Although we kept it moderate, I still felt a bit dizzy. Just as I was standing in the corridor, Susan came out to pick me up. Ignoring the presence of others, she directly linked her arm with mine. Husband, how did you end up like this from drinking? Husband, you look really charming like this. Yay, should I take advantage of your vulnerability? Me? I was a bit drunk, but not to the point of being unconscious, right? Cold and aloof CEO, you better rein in your thoughts. I looked up at Susan, my fingers tracing along her collarbone, clearly trying to tease her. Susan's eyes slightly reddened, and the palm of her hand felt scorching hot against my skin. When we entered the hotel room, I couldn't hold back anymore. I pressed her against the door and leaned in to kiss her. Aren't you pretending now? I caught my breath. But Susan hesitated slightly, tilting her body backward, her gaze seemingly filled with confusion as she looked at me. My hand rested on her heart, and I stared at the smudged lipstick on the corner of her mouth. I've always been able to hear your thoughts. In that moment, I saw astonishment in Susan's eyes. Her heart was racing, clearly guilty. I brushed her shoulder and walked towards the room, taking off my coat as I did. When I turned to look back, Susan was still standing there in a daze. Husband can always hear my thoughts? Is it true or not? How embarrassing. I hope husband won't be angry. No, I shouldn't think about it anymore. How can this person be so adorable? I really like her. I called Susan over, and when I saw her, she looked like a cute little koala standing in front of me. I grabbed her clothes and gave them a hard tug. Do you like me? I stared straight into Susan's eyes. Well, she's my wife, so what is there to be afraid of? If you don't dare say it, then forget it. I let go of my tie when she didn't respond. I do. She replied confidently. All right. Talking big is fun, but the next morning, I have to go home and let my mom take good care of me. Susan slept until noon, which is proof enough of how hard I worked last night. It gives me a great sense of accomplishment. Chapter 12. We boarded the plane. Susan held my hand tightly, causing the flight attendants to look our way. I felt a bit embarrassed, so I turned my head and saw Susan pretending to be asleep with her eyes closed. I thought I could take my hand out while she was sleeping, but as soon as I moved, she tightened her grip. What are you doing, pretending to sleep here with me? I even suspect that Susan knows that I can hear her thoughts, and now she's deliberately controlling her mental activity so that I can't eavesdrop. But it doesn't matter, I already know her feelings. After we got home, Susan cooked a meal for me. Seeing her wearing a pink pig apron and skillfully chopping vegetables, I was shocked. I remember Susan not being able to cook, right? Seemingly sensing my doubts, Susan chuckled lightly. I know you have a sweet tooth, so I learned how to cook just for you. When did you do that? I was surprised. It couldn't be that I learned while I was away on this business trip, right? Seeing Susan's familiar movements, she must have been learning for a few months at least. Susan turned off the stove and walked over to me. Hank. She called my name so seriously for the first time, and it made my heart jump. Actually, I've liked you for a long time. You said you can hear my thoughts, right? So you should be able to feel my feelings for you. But every time we met before, you didn't talk to me much, so I thought you didn't like me. That's why I never dared to confess my feelings to you, until we met for a blind date arranged by our parents. I thought you wouldn't agree to get married. I really regret not being with you earlier. She held my hand and looked at me with deep affection. And you, do you also like me? I shook my head. In that moment, I saw Susan's eyes change. Just as she was about to feel upset, I stepped forward and hugged her. Much more than just liking. I pressed my cheek against her chest, feeling her strong heartbeat, and couldn't help but smile. Are you that happy? Susan hugged me back, tiptoed, and kissed the corner of my lips. Whether I'm happy or not, don't you already know? Yes, I know. No, wait. I closed my eyes and tried to listen carefully, but it seems like I really can't hear Susan's thoughts anymore. I can't even remember when it started. But it doesn't matter, we can already understand each other's hearts. I couldn't help but ask Susan, so, when did you start liking me? Susan shook her head. I can't remember, maybe it was since the lollipop incident? I looked at her and suddenly burst into laughter. So, you've liked me since then? I held Susan. Wife, I feel the same way. I smiled and said nothing. Going back in time. When Susan called me husband in front of everyone, I knew that I would be Susan's husband for the rest of my life. I never thought that I, Hank, would be lucky enough to marry a mature CEO as my wife. This is a great blessing, and I will cherish it for the rest of my life.